Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in cooperation with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. It's wonderful to have CJ here, and he's continuing his series on comprehensivism. CJ, what do you have planned for us today?
Yes, welcome to Comprehensivist Wednesdays, an ongoing series of weekly events designed to foster the art of comprehensivity, our learning practices for building an ever more extensive, ever more intensive, and ever more integrated understanding of our worlds and its peoples. Buckminster Fuller called it being adequately macro-comprehensive and micro-incisive. Tonight's topic is articulating comprehensivity, the comprehensive design of our lives. To better understand how we might practice our comprehensivity, our aspiration for comprehensive thinking and doing, we might examine how to clarify or make effective such desires. Tonight, we will attempt to imagine how we might practice our comprehensivity. In the end, we might apprehend how the shape of our lives is profoundly connected to our comprehensivity. The agenda includes 3 segments with interactive sessions after each. If you are new, that means you will be asked during the interactive sessions to contribute questions or thoughts about our topic. This is an interactive forum. Let's get started. The first segment, I'm going to try to encompass articulating comprehensivity. According to Wiktionary, to articulate is to make clear or effective. Comprehensivity is our inclination to understand it all and each other. So by articulating comprehensivity, we mean making our aspiration to understand it all and each other more effective and clearer. How can we better clarify and make more effective our efforts to build an ever more extensive, ever more intensive, and ever more integrated understanding of our worlds and its peoples? How can we better articulate our comprehensivity? In my first essay for the first event in my set of comprehensivity events, it was entitled Humanity's Great Traditions of Inquiry and Action. In the essay and in the event, I outlined several possibilities. One was to let our life's missions and objectives guide our comprehensive inquiry and action. Another was to pursue our current projects, interests, and desires as the guide for our comprehensivity. Alternatively, we could give a significant stretch to our perspective by exploring a new tradition outside our comfort zone. Or we could explore one of the universalist traditions, including synergetics, cybernetics, systemics, complexity, cultural studies, world systems theory, pan-sophism, the liberal arts, Renaissance humanism, science and technology, or any of the mythological, mystical, magical, religious, or spiritual traditions. Finally, we could choose a randomly selected tradition to guide our next phase of comprehensive inquiry and action. How else might we articulate our comprehensivity? One helpful model comes from observing children. Children are presented with behaviors, ideas, values, and artifacts from their culture by their close relations and network of childcare providers. Children learn the dialectic of a language or perhaps several dialects from one or more language families. They are introduced to many traditions, such as music or biking, games, sports, schooling, etc. As youths, we practice or we play with these traditions. Some of them may strike our fancy, and we play with them more and start learning in depth. Sometimes we learn by observing. In general, we play with our cultural heritage as mediated through our close relations and child care provider networks. Gradually, we learn quite a lot about a lot of the different traditions that are important in our society. Over the course of many years, we integrate all these experiences into our understanding of the world and how it works. In this sense, articulating our comprehensivity is trivial. Each of us has spontaneously coordinated our comprehensivity from birth by engaging the sampling of our society's cultural traditions as we were exposed to them. As we become adults, many of us narrow our focus to just a few traditions, just a few sources of new information, just a few spaces where we interact with people practicing different traditions. The broadly attentive comprehensivity that we developed in childhood becomes the well-defined but narrowly scoped comprehensivity of the identities and roles we assume as adults. Through this ad hoc subjective comprehensivity, we become adults. Nevertheless, our worlds are so complex that the set of traditions learned in this ad hoc fashion often results in feelings of fragmentation, disorderliness, and incomprehensibility. Can our dawning understanding of comprehensive thinking and doing suggest other ways to articulate our comprehensivity? At last month's event on ambiguity, contradiction, and paradox, we learned that comprehensive learning alternates between breadth as the diverging, expanding, and contextualizing phase, and depth as the converging, focusing, and clarifying phase. This realization can help us better navigate our explorations by wondering which traditions might provide us with useful context and which might help us clarify what is going on in our situation. Observe that even when converging in depth, it is necessary to be aware of the breadth of the scope of the relations we have under consideration. And when diverging, we need enough clarity, specifics, and depth to assess the context we are scoping. In this way, we may come to realize that all learning involves a complex intertwining of breadth and depth as we think through the stories, experiences, conceptualities, and behaviors that form the bases for any tradition. By asking whether we have an adequate breadth to contextualize our exploration, and whether we have an adequate focus on and clarity of the systems we are considering, in this way we can tune the breadth and depth in our learning and thereby better articulate our comprehensivity. In the event last October on Chronophiles, if you missed it, look for it on YouTube. We examined Buckminster Fuller's practice of documenting in a largely chronological archive the news, reports, ideas, and artifacts that might inform our future comprehensive exploration. By curating written and material culture, we organize the knowledge that seems most significant to us for better understanding the world. These reminders of stories, experiences, and traditions can help us find patterns, interrelationships, and ideas that might otherwise be too faint in our memories for formulating insights about how our worlds work. As such, a chronophile of personal research records and curated artifacts is a powerful way to articulate our comprehensivity. Shrikant, I'd like to do a 22-minute breakout? I'd like participants in the breakouts to explore articulating comprehensivity. What is it? Do you understand it? How do you articulate your comprehensivity? Those kinds of thoughts and questions if people explore in a breakout.
Sounds good. So what we're going to do is that, the breakout rooms are going to be facilitated by CJ and Joe. The rules in the breakout room is keep on topic, be concise and brief, and feel free to disagree with anybody, but do so courteously. Starting the breakout rooms now, the floor is yours.
Yes. So that was a good exploration. I hope the other group also did well. The second segment, I'm going to look at initiative taking, profession, mission, and vision. In general, we might think of our lives as a series of initiative takings. All inquiry and all action can be conceived of as initiative taking. To articulate our comprehensivity as initiative taking, we might view some initiatives in our past as expanding or diverging for breadth, while others might be viewed as converging or clarifying for depth. Looking forward, we might assess whether our next initiative should focus more on expanding our breadth to gather more context, or whether our attention should focus more on an in-depth examination to clarify one or more of the systems or traditions we are presently concerned with. The society-directed approach to learning for children, it guided the comprehensive articulation of our youth. As we gather experience, we organize memories, and better yet, when we put them in curated records and artifacts, we organize chronophiles. These accumulated experiences, memory, and archives enhanced memories, can help us reflect on what our next initiative might be and how we might approach it. We might inquire as to how do we best learn? We might examine our patterns of mistake making through our archives or memories. We could work at strengthening our skills in those traditions where we are weak. We may wonder what records and artifacts would help us better select future initiatives for the development of our lives. We could ask whether the conditioned reflexes, the preferred conceptualities and behaviors and beliefs that we may have developed might sometimes contradict our other ideas, our other values, our other desires. We might undertake a broad assessment of the accumulated knowledge of our lives. We might find that this accumulated knowledge in our inventory of traditions that we've explored and learned in breadth or in depth beckons us toward a particular next initiative. We might ask, how can we guide our initiative taking to better articulate our comprehensivity? We might choose one of the traditions that interests us and dedicate ourselves to guiding our initiatives through its approach. In this way, we might choose a profession or an identity or a calling where we focus on this one chosen art. With our current culture's preoccupation with identity and career, it is likely that many of you have adopted this choose one approach for guiding your lives. Those familiar with the business and nonprofit traditions might choose to guide their lives by committing to a mission, or the even more inspirational approach of dedicating oneself to a vision. It seems to me that all these approaches, even declaring a life mission or vision, amounts to choosing one overarching guiding tradition as your life guide, as your comprehensivity. Yes, your choice might fuse many other traditions in an enterprising interdisciplinary synthesis, or it might even scope out a new space between already existing traditions. That is, your choice might be very broad, it might be very enterprising. But any choice of a profession, career, trade, art, identity, calling, mission, or vision is just one of many possibilities. Its scope is inherently limiting. When we limit ourselves to any one tradition, even if it is a tradition that broadly incorporates many others, we might lose interest in or might not seek out the full scope of possibilities for being human. We might not look for alternative ways of interpreting and understanding our worlds and each other. We might miss many options, many possibilities. Nevertheless, choosing one tradition to be our guide in life might be a strength. Some people in some situations at some times in history should adopt a focused but limited guide for their lives. Even if your situation doesn't demand a limited profession, there is some magic in the focus on a single tradition around which to rally your full attention. There should be no shame in choosing to strive for something more limited than the broadest comprehensivity we might imagine. But the choice still, any choice we make, whether one or broader, is our way of articulating our comprehensivity. Whatever we do will have some breadth and it will have some depth. It will partake of many of the virtues we have identified for comprehensivity. They were surveyed in the last event we surveyed them was the one on comprehensive exploration, comprehension, and collaboration. If you want to look it up on YouTube. Such a limited profession of our tradition, our focus, our guide, might be our unique contribution to civilization. It might be very special, so I don't want to belittle it. However, In its broadest scope, the aspiration of our comprehensivity is to understand the world and each other. There is no way to guarantee that any chosen profession is the one true way. No tradition can guarantee our destiny. In order to survey the full range of alternative traditions of inquiry and action, in order to understand the vast majority of Earth's billions, a comprehensively oriented explorer will need to engage, at least periodically, a program for learning that goes beyond whatever limits we may impose upon ourselves by vision, mission, profession, calling, identity, career, trade, or art. While any choice we make for guiding our lives is a way of articulating our comprehensivity, it seems to me that we fail to fully articulate our comprehensivity unless we commit to continually diverging, expanding, and stretching to learn new traditions, to further encompass our ability to understand it all and each other. We might be so committed to our profession that we only make time for going beyond its limits once a week, or once a month, or once a year, or at least once every time we have a midlife crisis. But in order to articulate the broadest comprehensivity imaginable, we must pay some attention to diverging beyond the limits of the traditions that we have chosen to profess. Okay, Shrikant, for breakout number 2, looking at articulating our comprehensivity, but now through the context of initiative taking, profession, mission, and vision, another 22-minute breakout?
Sure. Sounds good. I'm going to start the breakout rooms now. CJ.
Okay, the third and final segment is the comprehensive design of our lives. And at the end of it, we'll do a group Q&A. So if you had any questions from the breakout, you might want to jot them down now. If you had a question from the first part, or or any other question, jot it down, and we'll group Q&A. We'll all explore at the end of this short segment. So far, we have explored many ways in which we might articulate our comprehensivity. We looked at the ad hoc approach that our society subjectively imposes upon us as children. We looked at navigating our comprehensivity through regulating our diverging for context and our converging for clarity. We looked at how our memory, supplemented with our curated chronophile archives of documents and artifacts, can inform our initiative taking. We looked at how our calling, our vision, our mission, our profession articulates our comprehensivity, even though it generally limits our scope. We acknowledge that many people will benefit from such a limited comprehensivity. However, it could be that what is most missing in our civilization is a conscientious effort to apprehend the astounding complexity of the whole world. Think of it, a civilization of nearly 8 billion people with access to some 7,000 languages in nearly 200 nations, where we barely understand our neighbors, let alone the peoples of Nauru or the Gambia. Our interconnected global communication, transportation, and socio-political economy combined with widespread blindness about the nature and scope of humanity's large inventory of traditions, leads many of us to feelings of fragmentation, disorderliness, and incomprehensibility. Unless we strive to understand the world more broadly, how can we expect to secure our knowledge by testing it against the approaches from other traditions? Unless we strive to understand the world more broadly, how can we expect to form a more effective understanding of the ways of the world and its peoples? Our comprehensivity first comes to us through the ad hoc and subjective learning we receive as children, as our memories and our chronophile archives fill with knowledge about various traditions of inquiry and action. We gradually acquire the ability to intentionally and objectively shape our comprehensivity by choosing our next diverging or converging learning initiative from among the large inventory of possibilities. This then is the next step in articulating our comprehensivity, intentionally designing our learning journey by composing step by step an exploratory path through the traditions of inquiry and action that we think might prepare us to create a more desirable future. In this way, we design our comprehensivity. By objectively designing our comprehensivity and reflecting on our practice as comprehensive explorers, comprehensive integrators, and comprehensive collaborators, we shape our future. Since the traditions we learned provide us with our capabilities for inquiry and action, and that in turn provides us with a large part of our effectiveness in life, we might come to the dawning realization that the design of our comprehensivity is essentially the design of our lives. In my reading of the profound book, The Design Way, I have it right here, by Harold G. Nelson and Eric Stolterman. In reading that book, I learned that the first step in any effort to create a new reality is to design the design. That is, to first map out an approach to the possible contexts and directions that may help us realize our intention to create a not yet existing reality that we desire. We can profess one of the traditions we have learned about and make that the guide and the designer for our life. But alternatively, we can intentionally choose to explore a complex of traditions, some in breadth, others in depth, to try to forge a comprehensivity that we think might best suit our character and our aspirations. Either way, designing our comprehensivity is an important way in which we design the design for our lives. How will you design your comprehensivity? How will those choices affect the way you come to understand the world and its peoples? How will that affect the design of your life? Our comprehensivity and its articulation might represent the most important design choice for our life. Shrikant, let's invite questions for Q&A. I have a couple if we run out.
Okay, so we will, so folks, it is time for questions. CJ, I'm getting a feedback from your line, so I'm going to mute you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, folks, it's time for questions. So go ahead and let's put all the questions down. Go ahead and type exclamation mark to ask your questions. We'll collect all the questions, organize all the questions, go through them one by one, and everybody gets to answer. And everybody is welcome to answer any of the questions that are put on the table. So let's start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
So I'm going to steal Jeff's question. So I don't know if that's legal, but I'm disclosing it. So, but he asked a really great question in our first breakout room. It was like, what question does comprehensivity answer? Like, what problem does it solve?
Okay, what problem does comprehensivity solve?
Or the question
Now,
it answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does comprehensivity? Okay. Very good. Now that you've stolen Jeff's question, Jeff gets to steal one of your questions. Folks,
I'll mute him.
Okay. All right. Anybody else wants to put questions on the table? Let's go ahead and have CJ put some questions on the table. CJ, go ahead. CJ, you need to unmute.
Of course. What are the benefits and difficulties in objectively designing our comprehensivity? Would be one question. And a second question is pointed. How will you design your comprehensivity going forward?
Okay. All right, let's start with the question of how will you, let's start with the pointed question. How will you design your comprehensivity? Jeff, you had something, go ahead.
I did, thank you, Shrikant. I was struggling with my machinery a little bit here. So I'll try two questions. One is, I think that among the reasons for a comprehensivist orientation to anything and everything is how to arrive at a place where we feel like we know enough to be able to make a decision with potentially insufficient information. Because it is my theory that most of the most important decisions we make in life need to be made with insufficient information, like who we marry or what career we choose or what city we choose to live in or whatever. You never really have enough information to make that decision. And so how do we know when we have enough, to be able to make, whatever we consider to be a good decision? And then my second, so that's kind of the inquiry side of it. And then I think the other side of it is, okay, so then we take actions. What are questions that we might have as sort of default questions? Some things in our hip pocket that we might want to remember to use when we're seeking to learn the best things from our experience. Because we choose what we learn, and we can choose things that'll make us weaker or make us stronger. We can choose things that'll make us as a group more cohesive or divide us. We can choose to learn all kinds of things. We can choose to decide that we know nothing and we can't figure anything out, or we can choose that, look at this, we can figure some things out. Let's iterate this and see if we can make it better, or let's discard it and reinvent something new. So there's all kinds of things that we might ask ourselves in order to learn the best things from our experience as a result of the actions we take. And I just think that's two dimensions. One, how do you know when you know enough to be able to make a decision? And how can you best learn the best things from whatever happens?
Wonderful, thank you. So we got great questions, Jeff. You got 3 questions, one from Joe, one through Joe, and one through this one. And CJ has 2 questions. So let's see. So the questions we have is, what problem does comprehensivism solve? What are the benefits and difficulties in objectively designing our comprehensivity? How will you design your comprehensivity going forward? How do you know when you have enough information? And what questions do you use to learn from our experience? Let's start with the broadest question and the most pointed question. How will you design your comprehensivity? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Now, everybody gets to answer, anybody who wants gets to answer the questions. So go ahead and type exclamation mark in order to answer questions. Or you can raise your hand in Zoom. We'll start with Joe.
How will I design my comprehensivity? I think it's designed by essentially, and we talked about this in our previous breakout room, by our mission as what as CJ has laid out. So then having our mission, and then we can have a set of principles that guide our life. And from that, you can actually start to see what initiatives that you want to take. That's how I would design it, as far as, so I would have my mission, I'd identify what my life's mission is. And then I'd have the principles that are going to be my guiding principles that'll fit underneath that. And then this kind of touches on Jeff's question. Then that allows you to start to take actions based on limited amounts of information, because you have a framework for which you're making decisions. Now, I would constantly be reevaluating that framework, but that's how I would and that's where the OODA loop model would actually come into play. But I think that this is very similar to what CJ had covered with epistemic virtues, and that meetup. And I think he had, correct me if I'm wrong, CJ, levels of, and Kirby asked you the question, what mission, which level would that be? And then which, I think, values was underneath there, and something like that. I forget the diagram, but something along those lines. That's how I would design at a higher level, so then I know how to essentially act in the world. And I would constantly be reassessing that model. It's just a thought.
Thank you.
Yes, it was Kirby who instigated this topic a couple of months ago with that question.
Excellent. Next up is Mike.
Yeah, I think in a way, I was able to do that here with 52 Living Ideas, because I always had a vague definition of what polymathy was, and a comprehensivity I'd never heard. I knew a little bit about Buckminster Fuller, just a tiny bit, but coming here, so I learned a lot of technical aspects from CJ and also from Dr. Cordalesa. Is it Angela, I think is her name? And then Bernstein, who I'm in the middle of. I use it more like a reference, the Sparks of Genius book. So what I have found has happened, and it's really helped me design this, is I found a group of people that A, defined what these terms are, and then B, have allowed me the chance to step out of the comfort zone and take away the pressure of not having to feel like I am at a loss for words sometimes. Like, I feel very comfortable here. I feel stretched. I mean, some of the material that we go through, especially the design way, that was difficult. And but it's a good difficult, because I'm stretching myself, and I have a bunch of sounding boards here. I'm getting to know some of you personally, and I've learned some really valuable things from you. So in terms of how I think I've already done it. I think I've designed a path for me, because A, I've met you all. It sparked my interest, started to steal that title. and I feel like I have a path going forward. Again, I'll use the word sounding board, because if I have a question, or if I'm confused or something, or if I feel I need to get pushed, there's enough people here that I can go to and say, what do you think? And I just keep moving forward.
Wonderful. My answer would be, I would say two things. One is something I found from a very odd source. I was not expecting this when I studied Gita and Tao Te Ching, because what it does is that the way in which, for example, Gita is the one that I'm most familiar with of how to do this. It actually proceeds on two paths at the same time. One is that you're seeking universal principle, thing that shapes everything. You're basically hungrily going for that. You can call it God, you can call it Brahma, you can call it the Tao. You're trying to be open to the universe, universal principle that rules the world, rules consciousness. So it's a principle that covers consciousness and existence. So your eye is always on that. So that's one part. The second part is the Indian idea of namaste, where you're saying, I am the God in me, this universal principle that is operating in me, greets the universal principle that is operating in you, no matter who you are. So what you're trying to do is that you're trying to relate to another being from a very different context, trying to relate to the core of their being. And then suddenly all the differences can be seen in a completely different light. Because firstly, it doesn't stop you. The differences are seen as being superficial differences, and you're focused on the commonality of the core, and you're trying to see what is it that is common among the both, you and this other, whether it is from another culture, another person, another time, doesn't matter. But so that approach of Gita, which is the same approach of the Tao, I find very powerful, very simple and powerful way of being comprehensivist. And the second one is these 52 living ideas, the meetups that I've always done. Because here, what we do is that we are very openly discussing with each other all kinds of things. People come here from all kinds of backgrounds, and we are openly exchanging our ideas. Each person brings their own comprehensivist exploration, and they are speaking from that. So it's at the same time they are positively disposed towards describing what it is, and they're very generous with what they know. So it is just an amazing way, amazing shortcut. It's like a middleman, finding a whole bunch of middlemen who are taking different areas and bringing them to you. So those are the two ideas that I use for designing my comprehensivist quest. CJ, what about you?
Yeah, well, I like to, keep it abstract so that I'm not too articulating, very often, as Harold Nelson pointed out in his Q&A that you did with him, when you get into examples, sometimes people take them as archetypes, and then that's limiting. But I'm going to dare to violate that principle. And one idea, we've been exploring some other cultures. I led a couple of topics where I've brought in indigenous cultures. Maritza even organized a topic for you all on the Aborigine dream time. And I think there's so much hope and promise from looking at, you know, other cultures that we in the West, we look at our TVs, we read our magazines, and we get a certain view of what is human nature and what is possible for being a human being. How could they do that? You know, we know that there's a very limited range of what being a human being is, but when you go in and you look at the peoples of Papua New Guinea or wherever you look, in the Gambia, they speak English. I was watching some Gambia news, you know, just to take me in a new direction. You know, a country that's right along a river and that's it. Can you believe it? You know, there's so little we know about our world. And so sometimes just jumping into something far outlandish can be reorienting. And then I'll jump into our culture's prejudice and look somewhat at science and also social science. I took a course, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but I remember the instructor said that it's very important to for mental hygiene to test our assumptions, which also speaks to the scientific frame. So we often, all of us, we make assumptions about the way people are and how people behave and what is possible in life and in culture and in civilization. And you know, maybe we should test our assumptions and work on our mental hygiene and seek out contradictions to what we believe and try to find out, well, you know, I know it's true, but can I find the culture where it's not true? One culture I mentioned at one of our earlier events was the Padaha. There was a 2007 New Yorker article on them. And here's a culture that lives in the moment and just cannot handle historical references that are older than a few hours. You know, it's like, get out of here, talk to me about some guy who died 2,000 years ago. I don't want to hear it. We live in the moment. These kinds of perspectives and testing our assumptions, I think would do a lot for our civilization's mental hygiene. I think we don't test our assumptions enough, and that might be a way to motivate some comprehensive explorations.
Wonderful. Next, let's take one of the non-pirated questions of Jeff. We will go with what questions can we use to learn from our experience? How do we learn from our experience? You know, in comprehensivism, we talk about learning from, you know, exposing ourselves to new areas. How do we make sure that we learn from it? What questions should we be asking in order to learn from our new experiences? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer that. Joe.
I mean, everybody learns differently, so that's important to note. One of the things that I'm grateful for that both you and CJ have done is that you have not allowed me to be just a spectator, and you know, allowed me to be a participant in these meetups, Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, 52 Living Ideas, all these meetups. To me, that's the best way, because you can learn through both when you know when you're really getting something and you feel successful, whatever that means, but you also learn through failure. And so I think that that's, just putting yourself out there and keep showing up. I think that that's one way. I think you have to have a way of making sure you're incorporating what your lessons are and how what you're taking in, and seeing how it makes you better. And you really have to put your thoughts down on paper. That's an individual, very personal process, I would say. I wouldn't even say personal, but individual process. But I think that's the best way for me, is to not just be the spectator as much as I would rather be sometimes. That's my default mode. I like to listen to really smart people talk. But it's better when people put me on the spot, because then I start to say, well, I'm going to be able to answer that question a little bit better next time, or I'm going to be able to do something else, differently next, you get the immediate feedback, so that how you're going to improve. And then you evaluate within that loop, if you want to call it that, what went wrong and why, and you become more self-aware. So anyway,
excellent. Anybody else? So my answer is very similar to Joe's. I think you have to act. You can't learn by being a spectator. You have to do things. We've been talking about poetry, for example, or music or art. The point that we made when we were discussing art was the point. This is a big point for me, is that I don't like spectator sports. I like participatory sports. I don't like spectator art. I like, so it's not enough to just take things in, because it's by fully expressing it of what it is that you get that feedback, not only from yourself. It's I think essential to have feedback from other people too. So kind of you expressing. So the simplest thing is, whenever I want to, that's why I do these meetups. I'm doing this whenever I want to learn something, because I'm learning, then I'm talking about it, and then I'm getting feedback and I'm correcting it. So that feedback loop is what I use to take in, to learn from new experience. Next up is Mike, followed by Jeff. Mike.
Yeah, Shrikant, when you said poetry, that's exactly what I was going to lead into. So when you started that new meetup, I knew nothing, like next to nothing about poetry. And I think you have to keep working on your ability to stretch yourself. It takes work. And then the key word that I like that you said is contemplation, because without it, you're taking this information in, and then what do? You're just going to go to bed. If you don't take notes and revisit it the next day and actually think about somebody's answer, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, all of that takes time. But I think it's very, very important that you have to put the work in the zone that is not so comfortable. Takes time, but it's well worth the effort.
Yeah, excellent. I want to build up on the point about poetry in multiple ways. That's a great example, the poetry meetup that we are doing. So number one, there are so many people who bring so many poems. So these are basically experiences of such a variety of consciousnesses that are being brought, curated by so many different people. That's number one. Second, there is so many people who read their own poetry. I had my friend Faizan who showed up, and it was just incredible. Just the level of expertise, what is possible in poetry. And this is just an individual, and I did not know that he could do that. And it was just amazing, because it also shows you the depth and the breadth and the delicacy of what is possible. And then you have discussions. What we are doing is that we're doing, putting together poetry on courage. That's what Maritza came up with. The idea of something that a concept that we've been studying, many of us, So concept that we are familiar with, and using this new medium of poetry that you're not familiar with, and saying, okay, how will I capture, what does the color of courage look like? What is the shape look like? What place does it remind me of? And what can I say about it which captures this poetic pattern? So even if I've never done poetry, let me try it in a group and let's see what we can do. That is really a great example of how to explore a new field. So thank you, Mike, for bringing that up. That was great. Next up is Jeff.
Well, I think what I'll do is I borrowed so many things from so many of you all in the work that I am so privileged to do with often teams around the world and groups. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I've taken from what you have said, just the 3 or 4 of you who just said these things. So Shrikant, your emphasis on a person going within themselves and really, exploring in whatever might be the best ways, who they think they are, or who they imagine they are, maybe who they wish to be, and then going to whatever for a person is their meaning of life, whether that's God or spirit or whatever it is. If they're an atheist, what do they think it's all about, and taking that sense of oneself and a sense of whatever you think life is about, and then taking that into relationships with each other. And I really do think that namaste is one of the most powerful concepts that I've ever found with regard to this. It's right up there with OODA loop. And and Joe, your orientation to, well, there's stuff we can control and there's stuff we can't. So I'm going to ask myself, given that context that Shrikant, is always sharing with us, when I look at whatever happened, given whatever we thought was a good idea at the time, I'm going to look at, well, did something happen beyond our control that affected it? Did something happen that was within our control, but we just didn't know it? Did we make a mistake, in our thinking? What can we learn from this in terms of what's going on out there? And what can we learn from this regarding who we are and the assets we have and who we are for each other? And then last, I want to add this notion that, the 52 living ideas as an experience that, Shrikant, you've pioneered for us here. It is an invitation to folks who would find it attractive. And in general, people don't stay with it very long unless they really are attracted, to this way of being and thinking and sharing. So you, as it says in the, in the Good to Great book by Jim Collins, get the right people on the bus. And it does attract, a critical mass of great people. And it also, the ground rules, as I shared with you the one time we got to talk about it, Shrikant, I thought, well, the question I asked Shrikant was, where did you get these? That's really good. I do this for a living. And let me tell you something, those 4 ground rules are really great things. And so, but they, they provide a way of relating to each other. That's essentially what they are, is a way of relating to each other in our exploring 52 living ideas. And so having some way of relating to each other that works in terms of, us being ourselves, but respectfully, and us exploring things and being open and bringing some level of intellectual humility and desire to learn from each other, not just being all caught up in our own conclusions, recognizing that we're all kind of limited to our own vantage points, our own experiences and all that. And so I just offer you what I bring to the stuff that I'm so lucky to be able to do are things that I have learned from each of you, and not the least from CJ, to take, as holistic and as comprehensive an orientation to things as you can possibly bring yourself to take until you feel like you got enough information to make a decision. And then Shrikant, as you always encourage us to do, try it out, see what happens, and learn the best stuff and try to keep moving forward. So thanks for giving me the chance to say all that.
Wonderful. Jeff, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate. I mean, that was a amazing way of putting so many things together of what, and I really appreciate that you're able to draw so much from what we do. And I'm hoping that everybody does that, and more we do that, because what happens is that that's, whatever we do here, the more it impacts the world, the better. And just like whatever we do together impacts the world, whatever we do with the world, you're bringing it back here. So it is a complete win-win kind of an interaction, and really appreciate you detailing that. Thank you. All right. Anybody else wants to comment? CJ, would you like to comment on this? How do you learn from, what questions do you use to learn from your experience? How do you learn from a given experience?
Yeah, well, everyone's going to do it differently, and they're going to learn what's more important to them. And so a generic answer is maybe not that helpful. However, breaking all my rules again, because I wanted to highlight something, I'll tender the suggestion that when we're experiencing things and we're trying to learn from them, we might ask ourselves, what from this experience do I want to document so that when I review my notes again in 5 years or 15 years or 25 years, I might have the records that will best inform my future self in reflecting on this. And then I would tender that maybe if we ask ourselves such a question during an experience, it will broaden our perspective to try to see what kind of chronophile records we might best prepare for our future selves, so that we have the resources, the tools to look back on our experience and really learn something more incisive, more profound than if we just see if our faint memory can remember what's important.
I want to add one more thing that I thought of as you're speaking. I see learning to be of two kinds. One is kind of rational learning, where you're systematically trying to organize things and making sure that you've gotten everything. The second one is kind of the learning from the ground, or learning kind of subconsciously. It's saying, there is something that I'm uncomfortable about. There is something that is vague, something that it's like the dog that did not bark. What is missing? Something like that. So to be alive to that. And many times those ground kind of things are the unexpected benefit, which actually is going to produce an outsized impact, because it is the surprising thing, something that is not fully grasped yet. So using both those, kind of being alive to both the conscious, doing a lot of conscious work of organizing and reorganizing, and combining it with something where you're kind of stepping back and saying, what does this feel like? What is it that is surprising? What is it that I did not expect? Something like that. So using both kind of figure and ground for the purpose. Now let's take CJ's other question. What are the benefits and difficulties in objectively designing our comprehensivity? benefits and difficulties. You can talk only about benefits or difficulties, or just difficulties. Both of them, you're welcome to talk about either of them. How about, let's separate it out first. Maybe first about benefits and then about difficulties. What are the benefits? Why do it? Why design your comprehensivity? Joe.
I think this is something where, and we've talked about this in a way, we even talked about it last night. This is the idea of a difference between a fixed and a growth mindset, and then this idea that you're looking to grow and to incorporate and to learn as much as possible. And I think there's something very deep about that. The benefit is that you get as many perspectives as possible and on the world, and it allows you to be a better human being, is what it allows you to do. It allows you to develop, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, sympathy or empathy. Some people, I know they argue over that, but it allows you to also we were talking about a little bit in our group about initiative, and you can take more initiatives than if you're starting to learn about new topics. Like you can start to see connections that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. So you're able to your options for life, your purpose is enhanced by by essentially learning as much as you possibly can. That's where I see the benefits. And the benefits are the relationships that you develop in that process, to with relationships with the works themselves, if it's books or whatever, or the relationships with the people themselves. And the more you expand your understanding of the world, I really do think it allows you to be a better person.
Wonderful. Anybody else wants to share benefits of objectively designing your comprehensivity?
I think it also gives you joy,
Mm-hmm.
happiness.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you feel good.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So I want to give you an example, kind of a lengthy example of how we have objectively designed. So I want to focus on this, kind of benefits and difficulties in objectively designing our comprehensivity. So designing our comprehensivity and objectively doing that. The best example I have is what we have done with those three works, Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and the Gospel of John. Now, I am not religious, and I had never looked at any of these things before. So they are all new to me. That's number one. So it is expanding into new area. Number two, they are from three very different cultures. And we are approaching them in parallel. We're studying all of them separately. Number three, they are from a different time. So the sensibility of how this is from the scribal age, before print, where there was this kind of going back and forth between writing and conversation, which formed the way in which this work was dealt with. So that, and the benefits of it are just amazing. So the point that I was making of approaching comprehensivity, of using the Gita principle of saying, look for universal principles and then look for the principle within another person. That is new for me. It's completely new. That has come from this. this endeavor. So I've gotten a tool for dealing with comprehensivity by looking at these works. I was not expecting that at all. So the benefits, so that's a benefit. So it's such a profound benefit. I've realized the importance that there is a commonality between all the yearnings of these religions towards the concept of God and universal principles that science looks for. It's basically the same kind of a thing. It's the same human need for universals, of saying what explains everything that I know about existence and consciousness. These religious works were early attempts to do that. And they are doing it in a very far more integrated way, combining reasoning, emotion, action, spirituality, inner and outer, all together in this one large whole. So it's the way in which they're doing it is very different. So it is showing you a completely different kind of an epistemology. So those are the benefits. And what are the difficulties? The most difficult thing is that you tend to actually, when you approach something new, you tend to approach it using the ideas that you already have. So you end up, if you do it too much, so you kind of, and that we are trying to correct by actually immersing ourselves with let's take a verse and let's spend 1 hour of all these people discussing it, so that we try to get to the heart of what it actually is. Okay, as if you take a slightly less or significantly less effort way of approaching it, you'll basically read into it everything that you know, and you will not really get much out of it. So that is the difficulty of being able to kind of really have the humility to look at something else, keeping aside your context and your approach aside for a moment to actually experience it. That is the most difficult thing, I think, in order to do this. So that's my lengthy answer. Anybody else? CJ.
I think many of the problems in the world suffer from a lack of context. I learned this from George Polya in mathematics, that sometimes solving a bigger math problem is easier than solving the particular one that we're working on. So getting that broad context, thinking about things from ways you haven't considered, is so important. And the approach to comprehensivity that I'm trying to give voice to is that we even those of us who are focused on a life's profession or mission ought to spend at least some amount of our time looking for context, trying to stretch and get some perspective. The stretch into perspective identifies for us more possibilities, the possibilities of being human, the possibilities of doing things in another way, the possibilities of alternative values, of alternative approaches, of alternative designs, alternative ways of being. But perhaps the biggest benefit that I've been trying to advocate tonight is to create a more desirable future. To create a more desirable future, whatever more desirable future you would like to create, you need to find the resources, the intellectual tools, the social tools, the material tools. You need a handful of tools, of tricks, of we have underestimated and underappreciated and undervalued the richness of humanity's cultural heritage. The anthropologists, archaeologists keep finding little bits of evidence of traditions that have been lost. There are languages that are being lost, different ways of being human. And there's so much to our cultural heritage that we don't look into enough, and so we don't even know it's available as a tool for us to try to create a more desirable future. And that brings out this limited feeling that many of us have, that, oh my God, it's all impossible, we can't do it. Have you looked at all the traditions that might be brought to bear on it? Have you checked them all out? Are you sure we can't do it? On the difficulties, I've talked in other events at length about analysis paralysis. When we try to take in so much depth and so much detail that we can't resolve. Value paralysis is where you try to, we want to accommodate others, this context and breadth. But if you do that too much with other people's values and try to bring in everyone's values, you run into value paralysis, where you just can't decide how to judge things. And then there's the paralysis of holism, where in our effort to try to understand it all and get that broad perspective, we can paralyze ourselves. Another difficulty is, there's often this call for expediency. And that one cuts both ways. Sometimes expediency does demand that we jump into something, and a broader approach might not be appropriate. But very often when we jump into things, we end up committing to, the chess players know this, when you commit your pieces too early in the wrong place, it might not be the game that manifests. So there's a danger with expediency, and I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, CJ. Let's do closing, and then I want to just ask people, I do want to ask people about their experience with comprehensivism. Many of the people here have been with us for over a year. Would you like to do that before closing, or would you like to do that after closing?
Yeah, we could do that after. I mean, that's
Sure.
an interesting experiment.
Let's do that. So, in closing, I want to say we've got incredible meetups coming up on Wednesdays. We have incredible meetups coming up every day, but I want to highlight the meetups coming up on Wednesdays. Next week, it's going to be Sanjay talking about neuroscience. The week after that, on March 30th, it's going to be Maritza repeating one meetup that she did with Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society on transcendentalist, because that is a great large importation of the Indian philosophy into American life in a very, very powerful way. So that's going to be on 30th. The Wednesday after that, Mike will be back. And then one after that, CJ will be back. So that's the plan for Wednesdays. All right, CJ, your closing statement.
Yeah. Once we see that understanding the world and each other involves learning about the vast heritage of traditions, of inquiry and action that humanity has acquired through world history, we realize that to understand the world and its peoples, we need to learn a lot more about many more of these traditions. then we quickly realize that we can't learn enough languages or travel to enough countries or read enough books to try on each of these traditions in depth. So we have to pick and choose which traditions to focus on, spend our time on, which ones to learn. Should we learn more about cultural studies or electromagnetics? Should we learn more about cybernetics or the wayfinding of the Polynesians who sailed all around the Pacific when Europeans dared not travel too far from shore? Should we learn more about synergetics or about chemistry? There are too many choices. Each of us needs to choose the amount of breadth and depth with which to pursue those that we identify and choose to pursue. Right? Since our learning establishes our know what and our know how, the quality of those choices shape our comprehensivity, they shape the design of our lives. I hope it is an empowering model for thinking about your next initiative to better understand the world and each other. My next initiative for Comprehensivist Wednesdays will be on April 13th. I'm planning another exploration in a sub-series, Tools for Comprehensivity. On April 13th, I plan to focus on the measurements of life. I'm not yet really sure how I'm going to go about it or the scope, but it's taking as its basis chapter 6 of the Design Way, which is on interpretation and measurement, and I'm going to repurpose it for our comprehensivity. I intend to identify a broader and more profound interpretation of chapter 6 than when this group went through it. I watched that video and I thought you only got to second base. So there's more in that chapter that I don't think you were able to get in your first reading. So I'm going to try to capture some of those ideas and weave them into comprehensivity. But right now, I'm not sure. I might also include chapter 7 on imagination and communication and chapter 8 on judgment. Until I write my essay, I don't know exactly what it's going to cover. And I might find so much in chapter 6 that I focus on chapter 6 and come back to the chapter 7 and 8 in May. Or I might say, you know what, let me just do one broad scope through chapter 6, 7, and 8 of the Design Way. So if you want a head start on the April 13th topic, reread or read for the first time, if you're new to the book, chapter 6, 7, and 8. And my essay will be posted by the end of the day on April 7th or sooner.
Wonderful. I didn't realize that we are at 11:15. So I think this is a good place to say goodbye, and we will continue this every day and every Wednesday, and looking forward to all your participation. Thank you very much, everybody, for great comments, great questions, and great participation in the breakout rooms. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, CJ. And I'm really looking forward to, when I asked you about Design Way, you said it will take 200 meetups. And we finished it in only like 13, 14 meetups, something like that. So I know that there is a lot more. And that was purposeful, so that you could come back and say, hey, you're missing this, you could. So it's wonderful.
The group did an amazing job on most of it. Many chapters that I thought you were only going to scratch the surface on, you hit it out of the park. It was an amazing series. I really think chapter 6 was the one where our cultural blindness or something prevented the group from finding some of the deep issues. And so that's why I might only do chapter 6 next month, because it might be that to really clarify that and bring it home, I need more than 2,000 words. I try to limit my essays to 2,000 words.
Yeah, no, it is.
But so I won't know until I write it whether I was able to explain those parts you missed in 1,000 words, allowing me to go into the next chapter, or whether I need the full 2,000 words just on the measurements of life.
No, that's a very interesting observation. I mean, I also thought, actually, Harold also said the same thing. He says he was completely blown away by the extent to which everybody engaged with it and the directions with which people came at it, the depth. And the secret there is just that, you know, we have so many good people. It's so many good people, and they are so different. They bring, some of them were software designers, some are they're like management consultants, some of them were architects, some of them were, you know, all kinds of backgrounds. And each of them really kind of, you know, they did sink their teeth into the chapters in their own way and brought that up. It's and but one, I do want to point out one thing. It's really interesting observation of saying, what did we not do a good job of, right? Because it actually looks at, because you have these you know, kind of multiple people, multiple perspectives coming in, and say, okay, what is it that all these multiple perspectives miss, and why is that so? Okay, I think that's just fantastic question. So I really look forward to your exploration of chapter 6. Sorry, you were holding up the book, CJ. Go ahead.
Well, I was just noticing Linda's comment, and I wanted to help her and others see the book one last time.
Yes, Linda, it's Design Way by Harold Nelson. And if you go to 52 Living Ideas YouTube channel, you will find, I think, 25 different videos of, you know, covering everything, including a great interview of the author himself. So
the interview was great. I learned stuff from that. You know, I've got to revise my design cycle. He really convinced me this whole idea of cycles is somewhat flawed. I just, you know, I've taken so many design courses, and they all say that there's a design cycle, that I believed it. And Harold in that interview explained, no, it's a process. It has a beginning and an end.
Yep.
And I think he's right. You know, so I've got to revise some of my presentations that that were in the cycle mindset.
Wonderful. All right, folks. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Rican. Thanks, CJ.